Welcome to the Hyper Guy Motivational Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. My guest today is Red Claybon. Is it the third now? Am I correct?
Yeah, it's the third.
The third. Red is the founder of the Spirit Gallery. He is also a professional model. He has his B.A. in marketing from the University of Houston, and he is a proud Trojan who got his M.B.A. from Marshall. He is an entrepreneur, as I mentioned before, and you spent how many years in 5 years in the corporate world, huh? Give or take.
Yeah, yeah, 5 years.
He's an artist, a painter. He's a yoga enthusiast, and he does a million other things, which we'll get into. But he's very, very successful, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. Thank you for being on here, Red. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
So, Red, let me ask you, where were you born and raised?
Yeah, so born and raised in Chicago, very different weather. I live in LA now, obviously, but yeah, I definitely got the four seasons out there. So around this time of year, it's we're getting the snow, we're getting the cold. But yeah, I spent all of my childhood in Chicago before going to undergrad in Texas. So yeah.
What was it like growing up in Chicago? What was your childhood like? What was it like growing? I know. I always hear about Chicago being cold, and I always hear about it being rough. And what part of Chicago did you live in? How did Chicago shape who you are today?
Yeah, I always, whenever I'm talking to someone about my experience growing up in Chicago, I kind of split it into two different chapters, right? Because when I was born, my parents they were married, but they each had their own home, and they had homes in like very different neighborhoods. So my dad, he lived in Roseland, and that was an area that stricken with violence and poverty and just lack of resources. My mom had a home in Beverly, which was a more affluent neighborhood, more diverse. And so for the first part of my childhood, I was mainly living with my mother, and I would kind of go back and forth, to my dad's. But eventually, around when I was like 10 or 11, we consolidated. So my mom and I moved in with my father. And so I always joke and tell people I kind of went from being able to like go outside and meet friends on the block and ride bikes together to, living in a neighborhood where some of the kids on the block might be trying to steal my bike or like jump me, or, like it was a very different experience. And I also got to see two ways of life, right? And so I think growing up in Chicago, you're surrounded by hustle, you're surrounded by people who are trying to make a life for themselves. They have people that they're trying to take care of around them too, and so I think that bled into me. And my parents are very like humanitarian. Like my mother was a social worker, my father he was a firefighter. So I kind of grew up, with an awareness of the need to help others around you, and to do that, being able to pull yourself up first and like pull as you go. And so yeah, I knew that, growing up, I wanted to experience more than Chicago. I think that city will always be a part of my story, and it crafted um, the the sense of ambition and hustle that I had in me. But I knew that that is not where I was going to stop or like be forever. Like I had to break out. And so, that came later, obviously. But yeah, I still have so much love for my city. And the violence and like the issue with gang violence specifically, like a lot of that is true, right? The media though is not always accurate in how they like depict it, but it is very much so something that I was aware of growing up, especially when we moved in with my father. And to the best of his ability, he tried to keep me away from the streets and hanging with the wrong crowds. But I definitely, we lived in the area where that was like all around us. And so I've seen a lot. Like I've seen a lot of violence. And I've seen people doing things that, yeah, like are illegal, right? But it was coming from a survival mindset, and it was coming from a desire to take care of their family, or, to get the rent paid that month. And so I think as I got older, it allowed me to see things through a different lens and be able to look at both perspectives for sure.
Did you have any brothers and sisters, or was it just you?
So I have a sister. We are 21 years apart, and so I'm the youngest. And so I always tell people I kind of grew up with a brother, right? Because she had a son and my nephew. So me and my nephew are only like 2.5 years apart. He's younger than me. So we more so like grew up like siblings because we were so close in age. And yeah, we're still super close to this day. He's still in Chicago, but he was kind of like my unofficial sibling growing up because like even introducing him as a kid, like, oh, this is my nephew. And he's like right at me with height. Like it just, people be like, oh, okay. So your sister must, or your sibling must be like a lot older. I'm like, yeah. But yeah, just one sibling.
And so, what was school like for you growing up? Did you like school? Did you excel in sports or academics?
I would say primarily academics. For the first part, like, primary school going into middle school, I think I excelled and I don't want to say it came easy, but like I just did well and it didn't feel like a struggle. Um, I think I felt a lot of pressure to perform well academically from my parents. I think it was coming from a good place, but like as I got older, like into high school and undergrad, my relationship to academia changed because it was the the courses were more challenging and it was just harder. Like I felt like I had to work harder to actually like, get good grades. And so especially by the time I got to undergrad, um, I think I was working with the mindset of I need to get a good GPA so that I could get an internship, so that I could get access to a career and be able to survive and sustain myself. And so I had like a very clear um, vision of like what my track was going to be. In turn, that put like a lot of pressure on me to excel and like do well in school. But I would say in the earlier days, it came easier to me, and I felt like really connected to learning in a more positive way. But high school and beyond, up until M.B.A, because I was kind of able to reverse that during my M.B.A experience, and I know we'll talk about that later. But yeah, high school and undergrad was tough. Even though I ended up doing well, the process of getting there was just like it was really tough.
So, you did well in high school, and did you apply to what you ended up applying out of the state? So, what made you apply to a university outside of Illinois, and what was your major? What did you want to do when you got out of high school?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I chose to leave the state, I really wanted to get out of Chicago, go somewhere far, see somewhere new. Like I had like a very adventurous spirit, and I wanted to just throw myself into a new environment. But I wanted to do that, but still be close to family or have a sense of community. And so I have a lot of family members in Texas and on my mom's side specifically, and I applied most of the colleges that I applied to were in Texas because I saw that as a place where I can like go and get a new experience, new environment, but also have the ability to call my family for support when needed. And so I ultimately chose University of Houston because they had a great business program, and I knew at the time that I wanted to pursue business. And they gave me in-state tuition, which that's a sell. um, and I got a scholarship on top of that. So I also had to think about the financial aspect of college too, and I was lucky enough to have my father's support with undergrad. But the other schools like Baylor, for example, was the one that like also on my list, but that was private school, super expensive, didn't get a scholarship. So UH just felt like the choice, because they had a program that I liked. Houston seemed like a cool city, and I had family close by. But on top of that, they gave me money too. Um, and in terms of pursuing business, it was really, I guess, I want to say it was divine like intervention in a lot of ways because I in high school I really didn't know what I wanted to pursue. I've always been creative, like since I could hold a pencil. Like I've always liked to sketch and draw and paint. And that was the first career that I kind of told folks that I wanted to, to do. I want to be an artist. And then I got older and reality set in, and I began to shift my thinking about like survival and just being able to take care of myself and my livelihood. So then being an artist didn't feel as like attainable in that sense. And throughout high school, I would always hear like doctor or lawyer, and neither of those career paths resonated with me. And so I was still exploring, and I actually took this class in high school, and it was an entrepreneurship class. And that's when I began to learn about some of the concepts of business and, what it means to start a business, like what's the strategy behind that, and kind of, creating your own wealth and really your own life, from something that you're passionate about and something that's yours. And so we had like business plan pitch competitions where we would compete with other students in the city. And so that really like starts to just like build my confidence in that space. And, entrepreneurship began to feel like something that was a more appropriate career path for me. But I I started with marketing first because I saw that as like, this is a space in business where there's still room for creativity. So I could like bring the artist in me into that space. And so yeah, when I was going to college, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do accounting. I'm not going to do finance. Like that's too much numbers, but marketing feels like a good fit. And it's still, in that business bubble.
And when you finished college, so you went into the corporate world. How
Mhm.
did you how did you enter, and what kind of work did you do?
Yeah. So I actually had the opportunity to get involved with this organization called Inroads. And so Inroads is a national organization. They basically help students from underprivileged backgrounds, students of color, all throughout high school and up to get access to corporate spaces and to give them the tools that they need to thrive in those spaces. So they do like, career coaching, they do resume review, they help you with interviewing, and so they have a variety of corporate partners that they work with. And so during my junior year of undergrad, going into my, that summer, I had the opportunity to have an internship with Colgate, and I was super excited for it. I grew up using Colgate, and so I was happy to have this opportunity to work, with this really big company, and it was in sales. And at the time, I was more focused on getting into a marketing role, but I saw that as like my entry point, into the organization. And I found that sales, I enjoyed it. Like a lot of it was analytical, it was looking at data, and it was managing the relationships with the retailers that sell our products. So it wasn't like we weren't picking up the phone and asking people to buy toothpaste. But it was more, calling on Walgreens and understanding like, what price should we be setting our products at, or how are you trying to grow your category for this upcoming year? Um, and so I was able to convert from that internship. They extended an offer for a full-time position when I graduated from undergrad, and that brought me back to Chicago for a year. Um, and then from there, I the second part of the program that I was in took me to their headquarters in New York City, and that's when I got to experience living in New York, which I was really excited about. And that's when I got into marketing as well, because all the marketing function for the company sat in New York City. And so that was a really, I credit Inroads with that opportunity, because I felt like the entire reason why I was on Colgate's radar was because Colgate was working with Inroads. And even beyond that, just the preparation they gave me, just helping with my resume. Because a lot of these resources were available to me like at my school, but I feel like Inroads offered me a more individualized support. And they were offering the support with the context of like, okay, you're navigating this space as a person of color, or a person that has like these identities that could, present difficulties for you in these spaces. And that was really helpful. I think that also helped with the imposter syndrome as well, because I was surrounded, like I had like a cohort of other students who looked just like me or had similar identities that I did. And, there was a sense of community in that. And we were very supportive of each other as we were, recruiting and trying to get opportunities with companies. Like we would share resources. And so um, that was like a really important part of like my journey, because there were times during undergrad that I felt isolated, in my efforts of like getting into these spaces. So Inroads gave me a sense of community, and they also just gave me like tangible um, tools to use, like as I was getting into the corporate space.
Can you explain a little bit for our listeners what imposter syndrome is, and is that something you're still grappling with, and how did you kind of deal with it when you were working at Colgate?
Yeah, absolutely. So imposter syndrome is basically a it's a level of insecurity or self-doubt that a person might feel when they are working in a larger organization or a bigger space, but they're very aware. Either it could be identity related, like, if you are a woman working around all males and just feeling like, oh, I don't know if I really belong here. It could be tied to race, it could be tied to sexuality, or it could be just tied to you being new in a space, and the other people around you have more experience, more tenure. But it really is a psychological struggle that a lot of people, especially people of color or people with underprotected identities, experience in the corporate space and academia. The imposter element is like, oh, like I slipped through the cracks and I've like gotten myself into this space, but like, do I really belong? Like, did I sneak in, and like, are people gonna realize like, oh, like he doesn't belong here? Like he's just with the diversity program. Like they brought him in through Inroads. So like, yeah, they just want to increase their black numbers. Like, it could be very, it can impact your confidence for sure. And I think early in career, I felt a lot of pressure to always say the right thing, or just I would overthink my questions, like because I didn't want to come off as like someone who didn't know, right? But as I got older, I realized that, like, when you're new to a job or whatever, like a project, it's okay to have questions. That actually signals to people that you are seeking to understand, and you don't want to come off as a know-it-all or come off as a person that like never has any questions. Like you really want to maximize that opportunity that you have. Usually when you start a new job, you have like a good 90 days to just literally be stupid, right? Like ask the dumb questions, even though I don't believe in dumb questions, but like, that's your space to like truly be a student. And I think imposter syndrome is like a lifelong battle. I think it gets better with time, but as you grow as an individual, you're naturally gonna be faced with new opportunities and new challenges, and so that will present additional struggles with just like feeling like you belong in that particular space. Does that make sense?
What did you do to get over that? Did you just become more comfortable? And what kind of advice would you give people to deal with imposter syndrome?
I would say one of the biggest things is finding community, and realizing that although this experience feels very individual, like you will realize that like a lot of your peers are experiencing the same struggles with it. Um, I think for me, I had to like allow myself to accept my wins, and look at it as like, out of all these people that applied to this position, like I got selected. So clearly the company thought that, I had something valuable to bring to the table. Um, and that doesn't mean that I have to show up to that table perfectly or like knowing everything, especially being like so like early in career. So, but community allowed me to realize that, because at the time I really didn't have the vocabulary of like, this is imposter syndrome. I just thought that I didn't belong, like I just thought that, yeah, like I slipped through the cracks and I got lucky, and like now I'm panicking because I have to continuously signal to everybody around me that I belong here. And now looking back, I'm able to say like that was imposter syndrome. But I think during that time, finding community was so impactful for me because it helped me realize that this was not just something that I was experiencing. I knew it was going to be difficult for like Black people in the corporate space in general, just based off of like conversations that I had, stuff that I read, like all these things. But it's still, it felt like my anxiety made it feel more personal, more individual. And so now I'm able to like, even like within my MBA class, like there's, certain students where I could just confide in them and be like, we could talk about those hurdles, and it makes it feel less threatening because you realize that, a lot of people are dealing with that in some degree. And I'm a firm believer too that like a lot of people are just winging it. Like people might seem like they're super confident or they're very advanced in their knowledge, but working in corporate America, even for 5 years, has shown me that there are a lot of people who move up the ladder that they are just really good at faking it, and I think that's part of the game. It's just, being able to fake it till you make it, um, but be a sponge and like allow yourself to learn along the way. But yeah, imposter syndrome, I think it's something that it's like a lifelong thing.
What was the biggest challenge for you in the corporate environment? If you were to give somebody advice about how to be successful in the corporate environment, like what are some of the things that you should really be careful of in terms of mistake wise, or if you had to give someone advice about like what are some things that someone should be ready for?
hmm You know, um, I think that I would tell someone that they are allowed to be a human being in that space. And what I mean by that is that, like, I kind of touching on what I was saying earlier, like, I felt pressure to be perfect or to like know everything or to like, if I did know something, at least, pretend like I did. But I would urge people, especially early in career, to allow themselves to be human. Um, that meaning showing vulnerability. I think the unfortunate thing is that, it's not always easy for people of color, especially people who are carrying certain stereotypes against them, to show vulnerability in those spaces. But being selective in who you are vulnerable with could benefit you a lot. Like if you have a mentor in the organization who's like older, who navigates the world similarly to you that you do, like you can lean on them for support. And I had that. Like I had someone at Colgate, he was a director, he was a Black male. He would give me like the I was getting like the onboarding and just like, learning about the company, but he would give me like another layer of his experience as a Black man navigating that space. And that validated a lot of the experiences that I was having. And it also just let me know that I wasn't in that alone. And, he had spent years of his career at this company. So he was able to offer me great advice on just like how to navigate certain things. Key example is there was a change in I don't want to say uniforms, but the dress code, like for the company at a certain point, like we moved from like a more formal dress code to a laxed one where you could wear like a button up and slacks instead of like a suit jacket and like the whole get up. And I remember like I was pinging him about it, saying like, oh, like this is really cool, like I'm so glad that we don't have to come in like full suit anymore. Well, we never had to come in full suit, but like jacket or like button up, like it was just like very dressed up. And he was just like, yeah, but like be careful, as a Black man, because you people are already having preconceived notions about you. And it was, you know, looking back on that advice, I definitely see what he meant by that, because whether I could come in and be the most qualified person ever, but if people see Black skin and they assume like, he's a diversity hire, or oh, he's probably gonna have an anger issue, he's probably not like cool to work with, like he's probably angry or emotional, whatever whatever the preconceived notion is, the way that you dress, unfortunately, I mean, it's a psychological thing. Like people, they see certain things and they attribute it to a character trait, and that unfortunately ties into race and how we perceive each other. And so I having that conversation with him kind of helped me level set and say like, okay, like this is great, we could dress more freely now, but I still have to be mindful of, you know, the concepts or the stereotypes or the preconceived notions that are in the room before I even get to it, and I think you ultimately have to pick, as you get older in your career and you learn the lay of the land, you get to pick your battles, right? And so you get to decide, when am I going to conform to the status quo and kind of just, keep my head down and not cause any riffraff, but you also get to be a positive disruptor when you feel like it could benefit you and your mental health, or benefit people who are coming into the organization after you. And so I think that's a muscle that you kind of train, and you get a better sense of discernment as you grow in your career, of like picking your battles and knowing when to raise your hand and say like, wait a minute, actually, that's offensive, or that probably shouldn't be said, or whatever the case may be. But I do think earlier on, like when I was just getting started, that was the last thing that I was trying to do, because I didn't want to ruin any chance that I had of advancing in my career. That was like a real fear of mine, because I already felt lucky, being there in the first place. So I didn't want to do anything to threaten that. But yeah, as you get older and you get more experience, like the confidence expands, and knowing when to pick your battles, I would say, is important.
When did you decide that you wanted to get an MBA? Because you moved on from the corporate world. What was that transition like for you?
Yeah, pandemic, like most people, you had a lot of time to think about the trajectory of your life. And the program that I was in with Colgate at first, it was a 2-year program, and we got to get a year of experience in marketing. But when the program ended, we went into like a full-time position in sales, or and I went into a retail marketing role, but it was a little bit different than like brand marketing. And I was trying to like continue my career path on the marketing track, but the way the company was structured, like they wanted folks to have MBAs when they come into marketing. And so that was pushback that I received whenever I would try to like kind of pivot back into marketing. And I learned about Consortium, which is another program that's similar in a lot of ways to Inroads. So Consortium is a fellowship for MBA students of color who are applying for their MBA, and you could basically apply to some of the top MBA programs through the consortium. And if you get selected for the fellowship, you could potentially get your tuition paid for, or full tuition or partial tuition. And so I began to start looking at different programs, what they offered. I had this interest in filmmaking that I felt like wasn't really explored. When I was in New York, I got to take some screenwriting classes, and I took a class. It was a screenwriting class, and it was also like a documentary class, and that was the beginning of me like starting to explore that space. But I wanted to understand the business of entertainment too, because I knew like my idea for a script or a TV show could be amazing, but if I didn't know how to sell it, or I didn't know how to like steer those conversations with the decision makers, then it most likely wasn't going to come to life. And so I began to look at programs through that lens. And USC, they have an amazing, obviously their film school is one of the best, but their business school, like Marshall, also has programming in tandem with the film school. And so my top 3 schools were, uh, don't tell USC, but it was like USC, UCLA, and then NYU. So I was torn between staying in New York for some more time or moving to LA. But things worked out where I got the fellowship to go to USC. And for me, going back for my MBA was also an opportunity for me to take a few steps back from corporate America and really just give myself 2 years to investigate like what I actually wanted out of life. Um, I feel like a lot of my early 20s was me following a path that was, I don't want to say prescribed to me, but a lot of things that I was doing or aiming for or reaching for, it was like to make my parents proud, or it was, because I felt like it was what I should be doing based on what other people were maybe expecting of me. And so MBA, I wanted to be really intentional about how I approached MBA, because even in that space, it's really easy to get caught up in what other folks are doing with the program and like what their goals are. Like a lot of people wanted to do consulting, for example, and I knew I was just like, no, consulting is not for me. Like when I hear consulting, I hear like a lack of work-life balance. I hear like great money, great pay, which is like why a lot of people pursue it, but that comes at a cost. And that like all the traveling and just like the long hours, it wears on you after a while. And I was at that point in my career, I was very adamant about work-life balance and kind of making space for my mental well-being. So yeah, MBA for me too it was an opportunity for me to kind of remedy my relationship to academia that I was talking about earlier, like that, like just feeling overwhelmed and stressed in undergrad, and just feeling like it was so like the stakes were so high. Like if I didn't get this A or didn't get this GPA, like everything was just gonna fall apart, or my dreams were never gonna come true. Like it was less of that and more of like, how do I make this experience make the most sense for me and like my journey? And it was a beautiful, like I really am proud of the way that I tackled that, because there were times where I did feel that pressure, because we're all chattering amongst each other, like, oh, like, like, where are you trying to work this summer? Like, where are you recruiting? Like all these conversations are just like nonstop. And after a certain point, you could really feel like threatened in like what you've chosen for yourself. But, I was very clear on what I wanted. That's when I started to pursue modeling. So there were times where, I pulled back from MBA activities because I was pursuing modeling, and I was able to make both of them work. But, you know, like some people in my program might feel pressure to go to every event, every recruiting event, every like coffee chat, because they want to get as much exposure, but they also want to like show their face as often as they can so they're more memorable. I think I was a little bit more strategic in, especially because I already knew what I wanted to do. Like I was very strategic with like the events that I went to, and that cleared up more of my schedule to focus on the other interests I have. Because like as you said earlier, I have a million things going on, and like you know even though MBA is like a very intense program and it demands a lot of you, like I still had other things that I had to give energy to too. So um yeah, I mean MBA, like it started with me wanting to just take a step back, honestly, and take a break from working to learn about business, yes, and entertainment business for sure, but also just learning about myself and like what I wanted, and yeah, it was a great 2 years. Like I'm glad that, I don't know if the timing was right, but the experience itself, like I definitely wouldn't take that back.
So, given that you were in the business school at the same time as you were modeling, modeling is like one of the most competitive professions to enter, and you're a successful model. What kind of pressure did you feel as a model? Was it difficult to balance those two things?
Yeah. Yeah, I started modeling with the knowledge that it wasn't going to be easy, or and then it was harder again as a person of color to get opportunities, to get booked for stuff. We've seen brief periods where like diversity has been like the focal point, whether it's performative or real, but there have been like ups and downs with it, and we've seen that so much. And in the LA market, for example, it's very commercial, very like lifestyle and fitness. And so, knowing that and trying to like get into modeling here versus like in New York City, um, there are different approaches which that you have to take with like just trying to build your portfolio. So um, for me, I think a lot of it was I was aware of my body and aware of it was a combination of like my skin, like my face, like trying to make sure I had no breakouts, but also, my fitness, like trying to, keep my body up to par, tightness, and, just having that muscular physique, which is difficult when you're stressed out with finals and MBA and all you want to do is, eat donuts or, like treat yourself to God knows what. um, and I found myself like being kind of militant about like what I would eat sometimes. I think the hardest thing though was getting comfortable with the rejection. You know, you're gonna get a lot of no's in modeling, and it builds character in a sense of like, you keep getting all those no's, you start to get thicker skin and get used to it, and like I guess take it less personally. But it is something that no matter what, it's gonna wear on you in some way. Like it like eventually. But kind of I also learned like not to get super attached to like a particular opportunity. Like if there was like this casting for, a show or a brand that I really wanted to work with, like I would try not to get too emotionally attached to it prematurely because, there's no guarantees. The good thing is I was able to work with a good agent out here. I got signed to state in I think that was the beginning of 2022, and my agent there was really good. Like he I could tell he was being thoughtful and intentional with like my portfolio and just trying to get me more development, and he was really like putting me out there. So I've had some really fun and interesting and cool experiences through modeling. There was also like a little bit of an entrepreneurial element there too, because if you're using like a backstage, for example, or a swipe cast, like you are managing yourself and you're pitching yourself to these brands. And so there's been a lot of that for me too. And so I get to be creative in the way that I like try to pitch myself to them. And I remember one casting for there's this brand called Thuma on and I'm sure like you'll see them all over Instagram. They sell like the bedding, like the bedroom sets. Like they have dressers, they have headboards, they have beds, they have clothes too. But part of the casting was I had to submit a video of me just simply making my bed, and I tried to make it as like creative and playful, but like natural as possible. And I got to play around with like my filmmaking skills, and so there was like a lot of overlap too. And that was the cool thing about modeling is that I feel like it demanded a lot of my other skill sets, to really set myself apart. And I booked that job, right? And that was a very fun job to work on. But yeah, I mean, I was worried about how I was going to balance modeling with a full-time MBA program, especially because modeling, like, it's like a lot of times you'll get a yes, like a final yes, the day before the actual shoot or the day before the fashion show. You might be on a short list, which means that they've selected 5 models that they really like, and they're trying to like hold them, but you might not get that final yes until literally less than 24 hours before. And so that paired with like an MBA program that's a little bit more structured and like rigid, I was worried about like how I was going to make that work. But honestly, like I could say like there was, and I don't know if it was just luck, but like I really don't think there was a time where one conflicted with the other in a way that wasn't manageable, or in a way that like, because I kind of got to control my schedule with modeling. Like I knew my availability, I knew the days that I had classes, so there were certain opportunities that I wouldn't even apply to because I knew they're gonna need me for 3 days in a row. Like I don't know if that's gonna work out because that's gonna be around finals time, or that's around like whatever. So I think there was intentionality on my end with balancing it, but it really wasn't as bad as I thought. it was going to be. And I'm really glad that I chose to like go for it, because I felt like this would be the time to do it, because, you know, your school schedule is a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, and I guess it's a perfect way for me to segue, because you're super positive, and one of the reasons I wanted you on the podcast, you have a great energy and you're very positive. And what made you start? Because you're the founder of Spirit Gallery, and we know that you're doing the modeling still. Does When you started Spirit Gallery, what were you thinking?
Yeah. You know, Spirit Gallery for me was, you know, I really, as I got closer to finishing my MBA, I really began to explore what entrepreneurship could look like for me. I didn't expect to pursue entrepreneurship this early in the game, but just based on like how the job market has been, and like what I learned throughout my experience, I really felt like, you know, this time period might be a good time to pursue it. And I have a passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, you know, I'm sure you've like gotten that vibe throughout this whole interview so thus far, and like it's been a part of my professional work even when it wasn't like a formal part of my role. Like I help, like I've helped Colgate with diversity recruiting. Um, I've helped them build relationship or maintain the relationship with inroads. And then also like during the pandemic, like shortly after George Floyd, you know, I was leading sessions where we would have conversations about DEI related topics that, you know, weren't talked about as often or really with that much of a platform before. And it's work that I think is very important. And even though companies pick and choose when they want to prioritize it, or like, you know, it has its periods of popularity or priority, I think that there should be like a, you know, a consistent through line of effort and strategy behind that. And I wanted to, you know, I was familiar with the fact that there is a lot of DEI content out there that is teaching people the basics of like, what is DEI? What are microaggressions? What's unconscious bias? And that content, you know, there's a need for it and it has its place. I think there's a lot of that content out there. However, we don't see a lot of content that's actually designed to support the diverse populations within that org. And so I wanted to create a company that was kind of like a contemporary, kind of like a refreshed approach to providing e-learning resources for oppressed groups or underrepresented groups, like within these larger organizations, to help them actually acclimate and feel more connected to the organization. And so we have modules that are, you know, for example, um, how to set boundaries in the workplace, or navigating work-life balance, or how to approach 360 feedback with your manager. A lot of these topics for the courses were things that like I myself struggled with, or like like there were hurdles for me early in career, or they were hurdles from my colleagues or my peers that, you know, they've confided in me about. But I wanted the courses to be structured ultimately to support them, and for the courses to be informed by their experiences too. And so, you know, when a company purchases the licenses to the course material, once their employees take those courses, like they get that information, like they get that learning, but they also have opportunity at the end of the course to evaluate their experience as it relates to that topic in the organization. So, for example, if it's, you know, about setting boundaries in the workplace, at the end of that module, they'll say like, you know, does your company provide you? Do you feel like your company provides you ample room to set boundaries, or like what has been your experience setting boundaries with management? And that will then allow the HR team, like that data could get sent, and it's anonymized, so like their name won't be attached to it, so that protects them from like retaliation or whatever. So it's really like an accountability tool too, because the organization can then take that data and like have a better assessment of like how their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy is actually being executed. So that there's a value add there for, yes, the diverse populations, but also the organization too, specifically like people operations, HR, um, as they are carrying out their DEI objectives. And that's kind of like a gut check to make sure that they're actually tracking, towards what they claim to be. And so for me, like that is work that I can remain passionate about. That is work that it makes me feel like I'm connected to something, bigger than myself, and widening the door that has been opened. And I really do see this opportunity for me to just like continue to incorporate my creativity and incorporate the other interests that I have, like, from a filmmaking perspective, from a writing perspective. Um, and so, yeah, like I see like Spirit Gallery becoming, not just an ed tech company that provides e-learning material, but, we might have, a podcast one day. We might have, fireside chats with just like thought leaders in the industry, or in the DEI space. We might have a bigger presence at conferences. So there really is like, my goal for Spirit Gallery is for us to, build out with, our first line of customers and clients with the e-learning courses. But beyond that, I want to have like a wider network of impact in the DEI space in the future.
For a lot of people, when you say DEI, people, for many people, it conjures these negative images.
Hmm.
What do you say to people when you're trying to explain to them that DEI it doesn't need to be looked at that way? What do you say to people regarding that? Because I know that's something that you're probably constantly having to battle, because the media, they provide perceptions of it that I don't think are really aligned with reality in some ways.
Hmm.
So how do you explain that to people, what DEI is and the importance of it?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And that is something that, I encounter. And the unfortunate thing is, like, a lot of times the DEI um, practice is reduced to like this like wokeism, like very like, it's like a negative interpretation of like some of the things that DEI is trying to do, right? People will say like, oh, like it feels like reverse racism, or it feels like I'm being forced to agree with, things that like I don't, or I think during those conversations when I hear that, because there are extreme and ineffective, like there are people out there who embody those type of DEI principles or strategy, whatever, but that is not, by any means that's like one chunk of like a larger effort. And for me, I think it's always best to go back to the empathy part. That's one of my company values, is emphasizing empathy, understanding the experience that a person or a group of people has had, and focusing on that. Um, I think, you know, a lot of times, for every, ignorant statement that somebody can make about a group of people or person, there is somebody likely within reach who can offer a personal experience and say, well, like, as a Latinx woman, like, actually, I've experienced this working at this company, and I have colleagues who've confided in me about the same thing. But I think it should all, like, the conversation should always kind of steer back to, well, what are people experiencing, and like, how have their lives been affected negatively as a result of some of the things that they're speaking up against? Because it's not about control. Like, people, a lot of times, people don't want to feel forced, right, to do anything, to make any changes that they want to make. But the conversation is more like, how can we make this landscape safe for everybody? How can we make it inclusive for everybody in a way that doesn't threaten your sense of self or like your sense of individuality? But there has to be some admission, like at a certain point, that it's not a level playing field, right? And I think, there's so much data to back that up. What I've learned though is like sometimes you can give people data and you can give people, you know, uh, like legitimate stories from people like based on their experiences. A person has to be willing to be open. And so I think um, that's another take for Spirit Gallery that I really am passionate about is like helping people become open, or if they're already open, like to stay open. Because ultimately, like seeking to understand the other person's perspective can resolve a lot, and it's going to tie back to that, to that empathy. And in M.B.A, there were a lot of conversations about what that looks like in leadership and why, leading with empathy is important. And that feels like a more recent development in how leaders are evaluated. I often question even now sometimes too, like, are they really being evaluated on that? Or are we just saying that on paper because it sounds nice? But I do think that some of the most impactful leaders have a higher EQ, have the ability to, or the desire to like understand the people that they're working with and to support them in those smaller ways that actually are big ways. Um, so yeah, it always ties back to the people and being an advocate for a more level playing field, being an advocate for less exclusion, less imposter syndrome, um, less violence, and that is my vision for Spirit Gallery.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about because I think a lot of times people they don't get the right information regarding the meaning and the importance of DEI. They attach on to this notion that that means we have to treat certain people differently. That means
Hmm.
people aren't going to be equal, and that's really not what it's about. And I'm really appreciative that you are like trying to change that perception and working on really what is the real importance of having those discussions. Um, I wanted to also ask you about, because we only have about 10 minutes left, meditation and yoga. I know that you have to talk about a little bit about like, how do you use meditation and yoga to balance your life and to reduce your stress? And are those kind of the things that you recommend for people when they have a lot of stress in their life? And what kind of things do you recommend people do when they are under stress?
Yeah. Um, you know, I'm usually, in conversations with people, I'm very, I guess I'm positive, I'm optimistic, but I'm also, um, I acknowledge and I leave space for the struggle. I leave space for the pain, the suffering. Um, I think a lot of times we rush ourselves through our healing process, or we don't even have one because we're either in survival mode, or we feel like our emotions are invalid, or we feel like the challenges that we're facing, maybe we feel like we deserve them, whatever the case may be. But yoga, I'm so glad that I found my way back to yoga, because I used to practice it a little bit as a kid, but I kind of fell out of it. And, during the pandemic, I really wanted to just start doing something again that would bring me a sense of peace and grounding. And like yoga for me is my opportunity every day to check in with myself. I usually do it before bed at night. It's my way, or it's my opportunity to carve out an hour to just be. And I usually, I'll have my music, but I put my phone away. Um, it's usually like my wind down before bed because that's usually when my thoughts start racing because I struggle with insomnia sometimes. And so it's really helped with that. It's necessary for me now, because of all the things that I'm involved in. Obviously, that's stressful. That demands a lot out of you. But even just the state of the world right now, we have so much visibility to what's wrong in the world more so than ever. We have social media. I'm literally scrolling on Twitter, and I'm seeing children being mutilated and bombed. And it's, it used to be like you would watch the news and they would like blur that part out, like they would report it, but you're not actually like seeing it. And like now you have visibility to that, and it wears on you. Like, yeah, we're becoming desensitized to it in a lot of ways, but I think it still wears on you. The economy, the government, my experience as as a person with intersecting identities existing in this country, like it just, there's a lot every day that, you know, is coming up for me. And I think a lot of people are struggling with that too, and wondering what to do with it. And so for me, yoga, it's more than the movement, it's exploring the mind body connection. Um, it's an opportunity for me to check in with myself and to reconnect with like my Northern Star. Um, in the meditation aspect of it too, it's really powerful because I do think that staying motivated, like a lot of it is chemical, a lot of it is your internal dialogue. And I could be honest and say like lately I've been feeling the weight of the world. I've been feeling like my internal dialogue is leaning more on the negative side. And but I do think that there's utility in that. I think the meditation allows you to explore what you're fearful about, um, and maybe even find a fearlessness in that, and acceptance, right? It's like this, you're accepting like the nothingness, right? You're just sitting with yourself and you're accepting everything that comes up. And I think it's important during meditation to allow yourself, the best way that it was like kind of maps for me is like meditation is like you're crossing this really big street and like all these cars are like flying by. I mean, they're slowing down enough for you to like, not die, but like, you're trying to get across the street and like the cars are your thoughts that pop up. So some of them are going to be like the Ferraris, like, your dreams, right? Your aspirations, or just things that make you feel really good. It could be like older memories. And then you're going to have other stuff like other cars passing by. They like really want you to get in. But you don't have to necessarily get into any of these cars. You could just watch them as they go by, observe them, stay open. And then by the time they're out of your line of vision, there'll be a new car. And getting in the car means that you're getting consumed by that thought and that you're accepting it as truth. Um, I've learned that all of my thoughts are not my own and all of my thoughts are not the truth. And I think that's a very powerful, especially, in the state of the world now, like that's a very powerful mindset to keep. And meditation helps me strengthen that muscle. Meditation is not easy to get into. Like it's kind of like, especially if you have ADHD like me, like I think that it definitely takes time to get used to just like sitting and like maintaining that stream of focus. But the more that you do it, like anything else, playing basketball, swimming, running, whatever, it's like a muscle that you train. And the more you do it, the more discoveries you'll make, and the more you'll be able to maintain that sense of self and like connection to self. So I feel like there's never been a time more in my life where I've needed this practice, just to help me maintain, and keep swinging. And everybody that all the people that are close to me, I'm always, raving to them about it, and like we're trying to bring them to a yoga class with me, or like, so it's a very big part of my life, and I think that that is the grounding part of my life. Everything else is like, a project or an activity or an ambition or, a sense of urgency that I have. But yoga and meditation is it's my pause.
And I like what you said, Red. I think everybody has to find how what's good for them to relax, but
Hmm.
they have to do it consistently. Whether it's
Hmm.
meditation, whether it's yoga, whether it's swimming, some outlet for them to be able to get that extra energy or stress out so that they're able to manage their life more effectively. So I get to ask you these fun questions here at the end here. So
Cool.
favorite music.
Favorite music. I've really been into Afro beats and Amapiano lately. Amapiano is like a South African, kind of like a house sound. I love it. I've been listening to a lot of that lately.
Um, favorite guilty pleasure food wise?
Oof, that's an easy one. I would say Sprinkles cupcake. I'm gluten free, like I can't have gluten, but Sprinkles has the best gluten free cupcake you could imagine. I mean, you can't even tell it's gluten free, in my opinion. I've given them a lot more business that I'm comfortable sharing today, but that is that is definitely my guilty pleasure.
Um, favorite place you've traveled to in the world?
South Africa, hands down. South Africa. I spent some time. I did a wildlife filmmaking program in South Africa last year. I love nature. I love wildlife, and that was like a really good opportunity for me to just get more exposure to wildlife. And I just have such fond memories about that trip.
And what do you want to be remembered for?
You know, I want to be. I keep the word empathy keeps coming back to me. I want to be remembered for my ability to practice empathy. Um, I know I won't always get it right, and I know it's a continuous effort, but I do think that that is really one of the fabrics that holds us as people together, is just being able to simply give a person the space to show up as they are, and understand like what their perspective is, and that can eliminate so much conflict, I feel. um so yeah, I want to be remembered for my empathy.
Well, if somebody wants to get a hold of you and about your company and what you do, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you need like DI consulting services, or you're looking to potentially get some e-learning material for your business, it's spiritgallery.net. Um, and I'm also available on Instagram. You can reach out to me on Instagram too. My at there is underscore the red ghost. So it's like THE, the red ghost. And then there's an underscore in front of that. And yeah, like I would love, like, I'm always looking to expand my network and get connected with people, and weave them into my journey, weave myself into theirs. So yeah, please don't hesitate.
Well, thank you so much, Red. I appreciate you so much. We're gonna have to get you on another time. You a great interview. I learned a lot today. And thank you everybody for listening. Until next time, keep learning, keep working hard. Take care.
Nice. Thank you.